I'm on my third startup. My third one since Vena now. So, but if you think about it, if you go back to Vena, like those first 5 years, you're just building that first, like getting to 5 to 10 million of ARR. That's really what you're doing, I think, in most cases. But then if you think about where Vena is today, like 8 years later, it goes from 10 to 100.
Right.
Right. So once you have that foundation of recurring revenue and you have capital where you can scale and invest, that's really where, it starts to rock. And I remember the guy asking us, it was our first customer. He said, how many customers do you have, Don? And I had to think quickly on my feed. And I think I said something like, you're going to be one of our first 20 customers. And he said, okay, that's good enough for me. So my first advice to founders, early entrepreneurs is, look, what do you know about the product in the space that you're entering? Because if you have some knowledge and or a network, it's going to be much easier path to success, right? To be able to get customers, partners, employees, that you already have a network.
Welcome to the Product Market Fit Show, brought to you by Mistral, a seed stage firm based in Canada. I'm Pablo. I'm a founder turned VC. My goal is to help early stage founders like you find product market fit. Well, Don, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Pablo.
So listen, man, I reached out because you crossed a huge milestone recently at Vena. We celebrate a lot of milestones. Like a lot of it is really around fundraising, raising 10 million, raising 100 million. You've raised hundreds of millions. We talk a lot about, hitting unicorn status. But I really do think the kind of most meaningful milestones are always revenue milestones. And you hit $100 million in ARR in July. So congrats on that. And I think my question is just how does that feel? Because it's a small club of companies and founders that make it all the way there.
Yeah, no, I think, and just to be clear, I left Vena 5 years ago when we were halfway there, but the company was well on its way. And so great to see that they have eclipsed the 100 million ARR mark. Pablo, feels amazing. I think we always knew when we started the company that we had a very differentiated approach to the market that was going to absolutely work.
Take us to the beginning. This was, it's been a long journey. I think you started in 2011 or so, but we'd love to know just how it all happened. Who were the co-founders? How did you guys come together? Where did the idea come from?
Yeah, there were three of us that founded Vena. So Rishi Grover, George Papianis, and myself. We got together at a Starbucks one day and said, hey, there's something that we can absolutely do together. The idea was born out of Rishi and I worked for a company that was sold to IBM in 2010. And when that company was sold, we thought, what can we bring to market? Let's call it fill the void of what was acquired by IBM. And that's essentially what we did. IBM acquired the company that we worked for. That company had two products, but really IBM wanted to really, run with one of the products and not the other. So the product that they essentially put on the shelf is what we then came to market with a year later in 2011, as you said, but with a different approach. And our approach was we were selling a solution for budgeting and planning. All of the vendors were replacing Microsoft Excel as the tool that most companies use for budgeting and planning. We actually embraced Microsoft Excel as the grid technology in our software. So we kept people in a very familiar environment. And, we used to joke that we were disrupting the disruptors because everyone was replacing Excel. We went back and embraced Excel and brought a solution to market that everyone was familiar with already working in Excel. We had another line where we would say only Facebook has as many users as Excel.
Crazy. Were vendors getting traction? Because it sounds crazy, at least today, maybe in hindsight, it's 2020, right? But this idea of replacing Excel for anything around finance just sounds insane. Was that strategy working for vendors at that time?
It was working and it continues to work today. Some of the largest vendors in the planning space have a non-Excel approach. For us, we targeted the mid-market. The vendors that have done well, extremely well in the market where they replace Excel have gone more to the enterprise segment of the market, larger companies. We were targeting the mid-market where Excel, again, was quite pervasive, but also it was is the ease of use, kind of story. If you remember back in the day, there was the Staples Easy button. I used to carry that in my bag, and people would say, well, why should I buy from Vena? And I'd say, because it's easy. So anyway, for us, it worked really well. Like I said, it was, our main competitors were replacing Excel. We were very quickly able to, have a nice differentiated value proposition that had tremendous traction.
By the way, was there any like legal implications of kind of the way that the company started because the product was shelved or whatever? Like, how do you navigate that?
No, in fact, that was the beautiful thing, because when IBM acquired the company where we worked, they discontinued the product that we then re-entered the market with our own approach. So we fill that void in a sense. Their product, the company that was sold to IBM, had an Excel look and feel capability within their budgeting and planning tool, but we embraced native Excel desktop and eventually online Excel. And
so what happens? Like, you guys, I guess you knew one of them from that other company. The other person joins. You guys are at Starbucks, and you have this idea. Like, what's step one? Where do you go from there?
Step one was hiring a lead gen person. So I had complete confidence in Rishi and George to build a product. And actually, my background at the company that was sold was I ran sales. So I was quite confident that I could sell what we were bringing to market, but we needed leads. And so not only did we hire, our first person to generate leads, but I've done that in my last two startups since as well. So it is the number one hire, in my opinion. If you don't have leads, you don't have sales. If you don't have sales, you don't have a company.
And this is what, somebody like a BDR just starting to like dial, or is this somebody more like inbound leads? Like what are you trying to drive?
Yeah, definitely more BDR style, which, as we all know, doesn't work as effectively as it once did, possibly, but depending on which market you're going after. But at the time, it was highly effective. So we hired Josh, our BDR, who actually worked at the company previously as well that was acquired by IBM. So he had a track record of successful lead gen and started dialing for dollars. So within a few weeks of launching the company in August 2011, we had conversations with potential buyers. Even before that, Rishi went on the road with the product idea and validated actually it was something that the market would want. If they could have a solution that leveraged Microsoft Excel as the grid technology within an application framework, which is what Vena was and is, then the market would want that. So we had leads. We quickly got into sales cycles and were able to close our first deal. I remember our first customer was called First Wind. What a great company to be your first customer. It was an energy company based in Massachusetts. And I remember the guy asking us, it was our first customer. He said, how many customers do you have, Don? And I had to think quickly on my feet. And I think I said something like, you're going to be one of our first 20 customers. And he said, okay, that's good enough for me.
That's right. How do you say something that's true and broad?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And did you sign that before like having a product ready? Or like how far did you take the lead gen and the sales side of things before the product could actually be delivered? Well,
the product was, it was ready as an MVP, right? As a minimum viable product. So we definitely weren't selling vaporware, but, the product was definitely a young, early stage product. But our first 5 or 6, 10 customers, we were really able to cut, our teeth on. The product really did mature in a sense quickly. Early days, we were an on-premise solution actually. But within about a year, George, really determined we needed to be a cloud first, type of application. When I say cloud first, cloud second, I guess. But it was really quickly after we started that George converted the code to be, multi-tenant cloud software. And we were able to sell it then also on a subscription basis versus, our first, let's call it 20 customers were more on-premise perpetual licensing.
And those first like conversations, like the first 10, 20, 30 conversations you have, like how much of that was, you learning and validating, and how much of it was just selling and learning whether people would buy or not buy it, whether they would buy or not versus what they told you?
Yeah. I mean, this is what I coach young entrepreneurs. I'm going to answer this question in a roundabout way, but, I always tell young entrepreneurs, hey, look, stick close to your knittings, come to market with something you already know how to sell. And that's what we did. So we basically came to market with a solution that was highly differentiated, but it was something similar to what we sold, previously at the company where we worked. And Rishi also was a solutions engineer at that company. And so he's a great demo guy. Let's just say that. And so with him, with our lead gen capability, my ability to sell and close deals, Rishi to demo the product, we had a lot of confidence in what we were selling was something the market wanted, and the market responded very quickly that they did want that. And then George did a great job building the technology so we could actually implement the solutions and, have success.
Your kind of validation road, I guess it was like pre-validated. Like you'd already been selling something so similar. You were pretty confident that people would buy.
We were confident. What we didn't know was there room in the market for another player? There's already literally a dozen players in the market when we entered. And so to be able to do what Vena did and now hit that 100 million, like you said, with, a crowded space is remarkable. But I think it all speaks to the highly differentiated solution that we had in the market, and it continues to be that.
In most cases, were you going in and replacing one of those competitors, or was it like more of a bake-off at that stage and people were just using kind of like whatever status quo was? Like what did the market look like then?
We were essentially replacing Excel on its own.
Okay.
So when customers using Excel on their own were frustrated because Excel has limitations on its own when you're using it in an enterprise setting where there's like multiple users and you need version control and you need, a single source of kind of the truth that as a database goes, then that's where we were really replacing Excel on its own with an application that still leveraged Excel, but it had a lot more control and efficiency that Excel on its own didn't offer for that application use case, which is budgeting and planning and reporting for finance. So that's really what we replaced some other vendors as well that were replacing Excel, but really it's that, greenfield market that was available to us.
So it was crowded, but it's not like the vendors already had a lot of share. It's just more that they were also pitching their products at the same time as you were.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it was competitive. Like pretty much every deal that we were involved in had 2 to 3 competitors, but all of them replaced Excel. So it was just so easy for us to say, no, they're all the same. They replace Excel. We don't. And so, it was just, I don't want to say it was shooting fish in a barrel, but we were crushing it. We would win. Our win rates against competitors was, 75% or higher.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's really high. What do you think broadly? You mentioned you coach a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm curious, especially since you went after a crowded market, like that's one of the easy things to kind of diligence up front. So I think gets a lot of focus is like, is it a crowded market? Are you alone? Whatever. How do you think about competition in crowded markets kind of more generally?
It's interesting because my new startup, Una, that we just launched this year, is a nascent space. So it's not as crowded. So it's interesting, it has different challenges. I think going back to Vena in a crowded space, the good news is that the market's buying these tools, right? They're buying these solutions. And so really the game there was how do you come to market in a highly differentiated way, which is what we do. So it's really kind of, if you think about business kind of startup 101, right? How do you come to market with something that's different than everybody else? So that was really the key. So I think the fact that there were a lot of competitors was a good thing. It's amazing that this industry still keeps on giving because since Vena, there have been another, let's call it half dozen vendors that have entered the space that are all doing well.
What explains that, by the way? Like, especially something like budgeting and planning, you'd feel would be like a solved space and that incumbents, to the extent that there was new things to build, would just build them. Like, what do you think gives room for new startups?
I think the fact that everybody has to plan, right? Every company has to plan is a good thing. So in terms of market opportunity, and as the market continues to grow, more and more companies are, created. And so there's room for more solutions. Also, there's consolidation in the space. So a lot of vendors get acquired. And so it feels like it's a bit of a recycling where a lot of the vendors, it's probably still like 15 vendors in the space, right? But the first 5 that were competitive with us, when we came to market, have now been acquired, but 5 new vendors have come into the space. So it almost kind of stays like 15, ish, in terms of the number of vendors out there. Having competition, I think, is a good thing. It just validates that there's a market in the space that you can play in, but you've got to have a way to do it that's unique. And
by the way, we didn't talk about this, we kind of just took it for granted, but like what goes into budgeting and planning? And especially back then in 2011, 2012, like, people were using Excel, that was status quo. what was not good enough about Excel? What are some of the sort of things that those customers need to do that Vena was helping them with?
Yeah, if you think about some of the shortfalls or limitations of Excel, it is a spreadsheet was never intended to be multi-user. It is more now with online Excel, obviously, and in the same way kind of Google Sheets, have come to market, that it can be in a collaborative way utilized. But back in the day, it was very much a single user application, right? It was really a productivity tool on your desktop, and you could send spreadsheets to people. That was the first problem. So you didn't have version control, right? So you didn't know which version of the plan or budget was the latest version. People make changes to numbers. You didn't know who made changes, when changes were made. So those were some of the challenges. Also, the big challenges with Excel, especially back then, was, as a sort of a desktop productivity tool, is it's not a database, right? It's actually just data that's in the spreadsheet. The idea of centralizing the data so that multiple users can use that grid-like template or interface, but have everyone on the same page was a challenge. Also then consolidating different departments. So if you think about what budgeting and planning is you're sending out a template, back then, sending out multiple spreadsheets to different departments to enter in their budget, numbers that they thought they were going to have for spend and revenue and so forth. And so the idea that it was a very, kind of decentralized distribution of spreadsheets and templates was also a pain for people to consolidate all the numbers, to create a master plan or a budget. All of those things are solved by budgeting and planning solutions. And so really the greatest differentiation is whether you use Excel or you have your proprietary. So the other vendors had proprietary, grid technology with their own proprietary, formula conventions. So for us, there were no legal issues. I mean, Microsoft loves it when their software is being used, because they're selling more spreadsheets and more Microsoft technology as well.
And it was actual Excel. It's not like you replicated Excel. It was literally Excel and you built off of that.
Yeah. And, Excel has the ability to have, let's call it an add-in or a ribbon where you can, tie it to other applications. So that's kind of how the technology worked.
What was like the first MVP? Like what was the core features? Because there's a lot on that then goes on top of that when it comes to especially, large mid-market and whatever. But what was the MVP? What did you constrain it to?
I mean, so the fact that we were able to have spreadsheets in a controlled environment was the number one thing. So how do you bring Excel into an application framework? So, if you think about security is an important thing, right? So having security. So only people that have access to certain data would be able to do that through highly secure, user authentication. So that's part of the MVP. The other thing is workflow. So the other big part of this whole equation is budget owners or controllers or, let's call them, FP&A, financial planning and analysis managers and VPs of finance. They want to know where we are in the budget process. So when they send templates out to be completed where either department heads or different subsidiaries or business units would need to contribute to a budget, they would want to know where they are in that process. So workflow essentially drives that, right? So when you have the ability to send these budget templates out, you can also have the visibility on who's completing what. So we had, very nice status kind of dashboards on who had completed and who hadn't completed. So, people aren't chasing the numbers, right? So on an MVP, you need to have the grid, a database, workflow, and security. Once you have that, you're off and running, and that's what Vena, did early on.
And what was like the ACV? Like, what's the pricing for this when you start off?
Yeah, we sold it for different use cases. The primary one was budgeting and planning to mid-market, which, might have been in that kind of $30,000 per customer per year range. But we also sold it for high, mission critical regulatory processes to banks. One of our first 20 customers was Wells Fargo, as an example. And we sold to all, a lot of the big banks in the US after that. But we were getting $500,000 a year from the banks to use Vena for mission critical regulatory processes. It was a liquidity reporting process called CCAR in the US that was very critical. You had to report your liquidity position on a current and forecasted basis. So Vena was ideal because they were doing it in Excel and it was highly uncontrolled and risky. And so we were able to convince them that we had the greatest solution for that. But really, the bread and butter business for Vena was planning, and it continues to be that today.
How did you get in front of, what's the story there? How'd you get in front of Wells Fargo so early on? It was such a big logo.
We had a lot of confidence and also credibility. Again, going back to that stick close to your knitting kind of advice that I give young entrepreneurs. When we sold to big banks at our previous company. So we were able to convince them, hey, you should take a look at us because we're doing what we did before, but in a better way. And we got the meeting. I remember the three of us flew down to Wells Fargo. We hadn't even had our first 20 customers. They would have been probably around our 20th customer. We were there in our room with about 20, highly critical of us kind of, folks that were vetting our software. And we were just confident. And, we whiteboarded what we were doing and how we did it. And they're willing to take a chance.
And what does that look like? Is it $500,000 kind of right away? Or is it they do a pilot and then they test it out and then it grows? How do they do it?
I think that first one, it got $300,000 US.
That's crazy.
That was great.
That's great. Were you bootstrapped at that point?
We, kind of friends and family funding, that's how we started it. Yeah. We didn't have a lot of capital.
Yeah. When did you raise the first, I think it was a $3 million round, right? The first kind of.
Actually, it was just over $1 million, friends and family. Okay. But then we did about a $3 million round with some angels after that. And then we got some, kind of boutique investments from about 3 different institutional investors. Before we actually did a proper Series A, we actually called our Series A Series B because we raised, I think, close to $30 million, from our first real serious investor that came in.
When was that?
About 5 years after we started. Yeah. So we really did all kinds of interesting financing to get us there, but it was a mishmash of things, whatever, was reasonable at the time around availability of capital. Probably did about 4 or 5 kind of these little rounds before we got to our first PE round, which was, as I said, around 30 million raised on pretty decent valuation. And then the next round we raised was 115 million. Shortly after I left, I'm sure it's in the archives there, but I think Vena raised almost 300 million. So yeah, it's been a lot of capital raised over the years.
Going back to those early years, how fast things take off, from an ARR perspective, how quickly, you mentioned 20 customers, one of them was 300K. So I'm sure it's getting close to that $1 million mark, but what was that ramp like? It's
a hockey stick, right? It always is with these companies. I'm on my third startup. My third one's is Vena now. So, but if you go back to Vena, those first 5 years, you're just building that first, getting to 5 to 10 million of ARR. That's really what you're doing, I think, in most cases. But then if you think about where Vena is today, 8 years later, it goes from 10 to 100. Right. So once you have that foundation of recurring revenue and you have capital where you can scale and invest, that's really where, it starts to rock. Yeah.
Do you remember how long it took to get to $1 million in ARR?
$1 million would have been literally, I'd say, maybe a year and a half.
Okay. So it was fast, right? Because 0 to $1 million in a year is kind of like top decile, right, Mark?
Because we were perpetual for those first, 6 months or whatever, it took us a year and a half to get to $1 million ARR.
What were the challenges? Because it sounds like a lot of the things were, smooth. You know what I mean? Just from the perspective of you had a product that you'd already kind of sold, you had relationships that you could, leverage, and you understood the market much better than I think most founders going into it. And then it seemed to kind of just work. But then again, startups are never easy. So I'm just curious, what were the harder parts you think in those days?
Ultimately it's always about customer success, right? Making sure the technology could keep up with sales is really where we needed to, which is a good problem to have, right? We were selling a ton of software. And so, George was building like crazy because he had to keep up with what the market demand was. And then we also we had quite a large service department that could implement our software and support customers. So those scaling the product and the services organization for the success of our customers was kind of the most challenging, but, we obviously pulled it off. And so that I would say would be where the challenges were. But you're right. A lot of things worked well. We had a good idea. We were able to raise capital. The other thing is that the three of us founders were all aligned. We all worked really well together. We also had different swim lanes. I was kind of a sales CEO. Rishi was a product leader as a founder, and George was, the technical leader, right? So when you think about it, we all had kind of our own swim lanes, and we complemented each other really nicely. So I think that's really important, that we weren't kind of bumping heads on the same things and trying to do the same things. We were all kind of focused on our specific areas of the business, and we let each other lead their areas. And that was really important too. And we're all mountain climbers, in terms of it was all top line kind of focused company. So we weren't trying to cut corners or, save for a rainy day. We were like, let's go, and we all had that mentality, which is really important, I think, for, when founders are partnered with other founders, is that everyone's on the same page in terms of where they want to take the business. And that's kind of where we were.
And by the way, what was the biggest ROI that you sold on, especially in the early days when you were just getting people to move off of Excel or to enhance Excel? Is it time saving ROI, a security ROI, a accuracy? What's the main thing?
The biggest thing in that space is really getting the most out of your team. When you think about the manual sort of archaic way of doing budgeting and planning, of sending spreadsheets, chasing the numbers, manually consolidating the results, you've got highly, trained and educated people that are doing these really menial things. So they're not adding much value. So the biggest ROI in that space, or in this kind of budgeting and planning world, is how can you get, more value from the intelligent people you have that are in your finance department. So rather than becoming sort of people that spend a lot of time doing these manual tasks, people are now spending time analyzing the numbers, right? And, really providing more decision support for executives around where they should invest, and so forth. So, that's really the biggest kind of, let's call it, advantage. You're not really saving headcount necessarily. It's just that you're getting more value from your investments in people.
And in your case, especially in mid-market, was the buyer, whoever had budget authority, were they also the user typically?
It could be. Usually it's the head of that kind of process of leading a budgeting process that would be involved in a, kind of a software evaluation. So they would need to be convinced that this was something that they could be comfortable being systems administrator of, typically, yes.
They were close enough, at least even the CFO being obviously a finance person, I would think close enough to the problem to kind of get it firsthand, even if they wouldn't use it.
Absolutely, yeah. Because they want to know that the numbers they're getting are highly reliable numbers and coming from a trusted single source of truth, which is what our technology. Because
I find a lot of times that ROI of just get more from the people you have, which kind of is a time-saving ROI, can be a little fluffy, especially when the user and the buyer are two different people, because and when they don't necessarily speak the same language, right? Because whoever kind of pays that $50K a year or whatever it is, it's kind of yeah, maybe you'll save time, maybe you'll be more efficient, maybe you won't. You know what I mean? I don't know, right?
I think it's also that the trust in the numbers, right? That drives that. That's a bigger part of the ROI. I think for a CFO to approve an investment in this type of technology, it's because they want to trust in the numbers and are not feeling that trust when it's all very manual, So I think that's a big part of the ROI driver in a sense. It's more having confidence in the numbers and being able to sleep at night. It's worth the investment.
Makes sense. So anyways, after Vena, you left, you said 5 years ago?
Yep.
Okay. So Vena's gone on to grow. You grew it to about 50 million ARR. It's now at 100. I know you started at least, you mentioned a few other companies. I know at least one, which is Fluence, which I think grew to over 10 million ARR as well. And now you've got a new one called Una. Tell us a bit about that one.
Yeah, super excited. We've just launched Una this past couple months ago. We've already got our first MVP and customers, and the pipeline is looking pretty good. So what Una is software for SaaS companies. And it's software that I wish I had when I was growing Vena. What Una does is we take data from CRM systems, so HubSpot, Salesforce. We take data from those systems and we light up friction points of where in the go-to-market, let's call it customer journey, of where you're acquiring customers, you're retaining and expanding customers. We're able to light up friction points on all aspects of the revenue. And so now you don't have a siloed view of how just lead gen's working or conversions are working or how's onboarding or retention or expansion. You've got in the siloed world of looking at all of that data, it's hard to make really good decisions. So Una is a single place that brings the data together that shows you a holistic view of your revenue and go-to-market motions that are working and not working. And so that's the first part of it. And then we also provide frameworks and resources on how to improve.
And is it all just CRM data, or do you tap into other data sources to provide that like holistic picture?
The other data sources might be customer success data or product management data as well. So, and finance. Finance is a big part of it still. So our heritage being in that planning space, and the team that I have largely come from that kind of budgeting and planning space as well, is we are closely also integrated into finance, because really at the end of the day, it's not just about revenue intelligence. It's about how you then take that intelligence and make proper investments to continue to grow in a more efficient way. So we provide, that critical information to the CFO as well. So we're super excited. It's software, like I said, I wish I had.
Why is that? Like what you say you wish you had, like what sort of things do you think this would have shown you that you otherwise either didn't see or was very hard to see?
Great question. I'll give you a great example. Early days at Vena, going back to Vena now, had invested over $1 million launching a go-to-market motion for enterprise. Okay, hired very expensive sales reps. Really the way we were going at that market was very similar to the way we were going at the mid-market. But, those are very different segments, right? Mid-market is kind of a two-stage kind of sales process. Enterprise, longer sales cycles, lots of other different complexities around selling into that space. And, intuitively, obviously, we knew what those were, but having a solution that could show us, for example, conversion metrics across every stage of a sales cycle, for enterprise, which is what Una can do, but we didn't have that data available to us early days, millions of dollars, where it just took us a long time to figure out that market, that segment of the market, where if we had what Una can provide today, which is really, really great data around, what friction points there were in that segment, but also we provide benchmarks as well in Una on what those conversion rates should be along that, all the stuff. So it would have been much more efficient for us to get to.
Are those different conversion rates than what you might get within like HubSpot or Salesforce?
Yeah, I mean, so, the data comes from there, but we calculate the conversion rates, right? And then if you look at every aspect of the customer journey from acquisition to even retention and expansion, it's all about conversions along those stages. So Una, super excited in that we're now helping software companies deal with challenges that we face ourselves in growing and scaling businesses. And so, I think having that technology and capability we'd be having this meeting 2 years ago and having hit 100 million. I think which it would have accelerated our journey, our revenue.
And are you like CEO of this business, or how do you structure it these days?
Yeah, no, since I left Vena, I haven't actually been full-time CEO of either my previous company, Fluence, which was just acquired by Anaplan a few months ago. I take a role more of an executive chairman where I hire leadership. I help to raise capital, and I help in strategic sort of initiatives, whether it's mergers and acquisitions or especially go-to-market type of strategic initiatives, given my background in sales leadership. So so I've hired a CEO who's awesome. Actually, he ran sales at Vena. And the team that I have are some former Vena folks, but also some former Fluence folks and people that I've worked with even at the company prior to that I mentioned that was acquired by IBM. So, building having a team that you can trust, that they know what they're doing and is great. So super excited about where I think Una can go and really help the SaaS industry in general to better understand where their revenue is coming from and how to optimize that.
By the way, I have to ask, what keeps you going as a founder? A lot of people would have, either retired to the beach or worked on pure passion projects.
Yeah.
You seem to just you just want to keep building more companies.
Yeah, I tried that whole retirement thing. It didn't last long. I think it was a couple of months after Vena. The thing is, it's muscle. It's a little bit of muscle memory, right? So I've been in this industry for 30 years now in software, and I've done a bunch of different things. I've actually built a golf course. I got a couple of records I've released. I'm a musician as well. So I have these hobbies. I've got a family, obviously. We're busy with kids and all that. Kids are older now. But for me, the excitement of taking an idea and a product to market is just something that really keeps me going. Working with great people, there's the social component, but also, the satisfaction of seeing other people succeed is really what keeps me going as well. So I love being able to coach and mentor, on the team. So that's kind of why I keep doing it. And I'm never going to be a professional golfer or a rock star. So this is something that I can, continue to do. And
right. But you're pretty good at startups. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Well, listen, we'll stop it there. We'll end with the two questions that we always end on. Going back to Vena days, and this was a while ago, but when did you feel like you had true product market fit?
It was really early on. Again, just, having come from an industry that was doing something like what Vena did successfully, but we actually were able to even improve upon that idea. I would say, in fact, I left my very, very high paying job to start Vena. I think it was a 7-figure income the year I left, just to take a risk to start something. But I did it without even seeing the product. After I talked to Rishi, I said, "What do you build?" And he said, "This is it. This is the idea." Just on the idea, I knew it was going to go.
What kind of mental math do you have to make when you're making 7 figures for the startup to make sense? Like you think about it, you're making $1 million a year, 10 years, that's $10 million. That's if your salary doesn't increase at all. It's basically guaranteed. And if you own 20%,
it is highly taxed though. The thing is, we all know, what I mean? You're lucky if you get to keep half of that. I think the nice thing, look, there's definitely you have to have, there's always an ROI in a sense, right? Of what you're doing. You have to convince your, other significant others sometimes, which I had to do. We had a young family and a very secure situation, but, it's all about also, money isn't everything, as you know. It's about, being happy, right? And what you're doing. And so to me, at that stage of my career, it was like, I either did that. I probably, if I didn't do it, I would never do it. You know what I mean? So I was kind of already, 20 plus years into a career. And so it was the time. And I'm glad I did. But yeah.
But you had to feel like this is at least $100 million exit minimum. Otherwise, it's just not worth it, or not really.
Yeah, no, I think you think about stuff like that. You go, hey, you know what, for us to share, some success across the founding team and our employees who are shareholders and our investors, you have to have a number, I guess, in mind. Yeah. You could say that, we definitely thought that we would have to have at least a business that would get to that kind of number. Yeah.
That makes sense. Well, that's the difference, right? When you're starting and you're like 25, you're making like very little, next to nothing. You're like, obviously you want it to be $100 million, $1 billion business, but like the reality is you own 20% even of like a $20 million exit. And that's a life-changing event at 28 or 20 or 30, right? So it's just different math. Okay, cool. And then the last question is just, and especially because you work with so many founders, like what do you find is some of the most common advice that you find yourself giving to founders these days?
I mentioned it a few times, but I think that first one is so critical. Like I remember someone came to me and said, "Hey, Don, I got this great idea about how to, bring smoke alarms for forest fires to the market." And I said, "I don't know anything about forest fires or smoke alarms. So that's a great idea, I'm sure, but it's not something that I'm going to get involved in." So we know, as an example, I think it's a great idea because let's face it, a lot of forest fires, to have advance notice of that for firefighters would be a good thing. But, I don't know if I would be successful launching something like that. So my first advice to founders or early entrepreneurs is, look, what do you know about the product and the space that you're entering? Because if you have some knowledge and or a network, it's going to be much easier path to success, right? To be able to get customers, partners, employees, that you already have a network, that you can kind of lean on. Whereas if it's something kind of totally brand new, that's never been something in your kind of historical career, it's just going to be more challenging. Not to say that it can't be successful, but it's just much more higher risk and challenging.
Well done. We'll stop it there. Thanks a lot for spending time with us.
Good stuff, Pablo. Nice to speak with you as well. Take care, buddy.
If you listen to this episode and the show and you like it, I have a huge favor to ask for you. Well, it's actually a really small favor, but it has huge impact. But whichever app you're listening to this episode on, take it out, go to a Product Market Fit Show and leave a review, please. It's going to help. It's not just going to help me, to be clear. It's going to help other founders discover this show, because the algorithms, whether it's Spotify, whether it's Apple, whether it's any other podcast player, one of the big things they look at is frequency of reviews. It's quantity of reviews. And the reality is, if all of you listening right now left reviews, we would have thousands of reviews. So please take literally a minute, even if you're just writing like great podcast or I love this podcast, whatever it is, just write a few words. Obviously, the longer the better, the more detailed the better, but write anything, leave 5 stars, and you will be helping me, but most importantly, many other founders just like you discover the show. Thank you.